Okay, so welcome everyone to the FAFSA line by line. We are going to be looking at the 24-25 FAFSA. I'll give more information on that. But my name is Manuel Talavera. I go by Manny. I'm a professional development specialist with ISAC. I'm going to be co-presenting with my colleague Tommy Semanek. You'll be coming on a little bit later, talk about financials and second half of the presentation. But before I begin, I want to go over some housekeeping items. So the session is being recorded. We are going to upload this to our website via YouTube. So just look out for that. If you are having trouble hearing me, I've been talking for a little bit now. You can use the call me feature. If you hover your mouse cursor over the mute button, you'll see that downward button. So click on the audio options and you will be able to call in or have someone dial in for that. You can also use the Q&A feature to ask any questions. You can see up in the panelist, I'm being joined by some of my colleagues who will be available to help answer any questions you may have. You can also check out future webinars, whether it's professional development webinars, FAFSA related, or PACE related. We host them on our website, again, even if it's in person or virtual. And we're also offering continuing education and professional development hours for this webinar. So we'll share a link in the chat later towards the end of this presentation. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about ISAC. For those who are not familiar with ISAC, I like to refer to us as the largest one-stop resource for financial aid information. Our mission is to provide Illinois students with information and assistance to help make education beyond high school more accessible and affordable. We also administer scholarships and grants, like our flagship program, the Monetary Award Program, the MAP grant. And we also, in our division of college access and outreach, and specifically in professional development and training, we provide professional development offerings on navigating the financial aid process. So we have different resources and support for underrepresented students. We also do webinars outside of the FAFSA, like for supporting students at risk of being homeless or students experiencing homelessness, for example, and student loan repayment and forgiveness programs, just to give a few of those examples. So this is what we're going to go over today. We're going to go over a dependent student, identity and demographic information. We're going to go over student financials, as well as parent identity and demographics information, parent financials, as well as FAFSA confirmation and processing. So with that, I just want to give a very brief overview of how this presentation is going to go. So the screenshots used in this presentation are intended to show what the FAFSA will look like for a dependent student. Okay, and I'll go over as to what that means later on in this presentation. But essentially, dependent students are required to provide parent information. And due to skip logic, most students will not need to answer most of the questions on this FAFSA because we are going to be reviewing the paper version. We don't recommend that students complete it because it does take longer. There are specific rules that students have to follow when completing really any federal form, but we find that this specific form, the FAFSA, can be a little bit challenging. And so if a student completes it incorrectly, it's going to come back as a non-complete. And then if it is complete, it gets sent to a FAFSA processor who then inputs that information manually. So that takes time. 99.9% of FAFSAs are processed on the web. We are seeing that trend dip a little bit for this year, but again, we're recommending that most students we're recommending that most students complete the FAFSA on the web unless they have a certain deadline to meet. Then they can complete the paper version if it's available to them and they want to complete it. And to keep in mind, most students are going to be completing a FAFSA to receive financial aid, as they will qualify them for both federal and state financial aid. Okay, so let's talk about some major changes to the 24-25 FAFSA before we get into the form. Everyone is going to be using their Federal Student Aid ID, their FSA ID, to complete their own section. So the application follows what's called a role-based. So students will log in, they will invite their parents, and parents will come in as contributors, the student being the main contributor, and the parent can come in and invite their spouse if they're required to provide information on that. But something to keep in mind is that this is a new experience for students. So it's something to just keep that in mind as students go and find and complete the application, as well as the directed data exchange. So students and parents need to provide consent that their federal tax information, that they want their federal tax information to be transferred directly from the IRS. This is replacing the IRS data retrieval tool. It's built into the FAFSA, and it's required as the student enters their information and the parents' information. And if parents and students do not do this, this will disqualify the student from receiving federal student aid. So it is required that they do so. It is even available for those who aren't required to file taxes or don't have the tax on file with the IRS. As well as the Parent Wizard tool. This helps determine which parent will be reported on the FAFSA. So we'll go over that later on as to what that looks like. But this is a helpful tool in helping students kind of navigate which parents they need to invite as contributors. Then lastly, skip logic. Students can skip upwards of 26 questions. I've seen certain students completing the FAFSA in about 10 minutes or less. And of course, it's not going to be for everyone. And this is without all of the glitches and workarounds that we've seen this year in this sort of tumultuous FAFSA release date of 24/25 that was in late December of 2023. But again, for most students, if they're able to go through that question, it's going to be a more sort of enhanced experience for them. So let's go over the student identity and demographic information. So once a student logs in, they're going to see the FAFSA, or as a student goes into studentaid.gov or FAFSA.gov, they're going to see the landing page, which will indicate whether they want to start a new form or edit an existing form. Keep in mind, because students are unable to make changes to their FAFSA form right now because ICERs haven't been released. So if a student already submitted their FAFSA, they can't make corrections or updates to it until mid-March is the hopeful date. So my colleague Tommy will talk a little bit about that in our FAFSA processing section. So students can only start a new form right now. Now, parents are certainly welcome to start the new form, complete their section, and then invite the student as a contributor, so to speak, because it's their form. The student being the main contributor, we recommend that the student start the application first. And as the student is as the student is entering their information, the parent and student should already have their FSA ID created so they can get into the application much quicker. So then they get to log in that information. So if you're working with a student or parent that hasn't created their FSA ID yet, they can go ahead and create an account. Federal Student Aid is recommending that students and parents create their FSA ID first because it's going to make the experience better for the student, as it does take about 2 to 3 business days for an FSA ID to be verified. Well, essentially what Social Security Administration and Federal Student Aid are doing is they're ensuring that that information as the student is creating their FSA ID matches with what's on file with the Social Security Administration. So if they don't do that, they're still able to create their FSA ID on the spot and sign the application with it. However, they're not going to see their student aid index or their Pell Grant eligibility information gets verified. So as a login, so this is an example of a student. So you'll see that they're starting a FAFSA form as a student or parent. Again, we're recommending that the student creates their portion first and invite their parents as contributors. So once the student gets in it, they're going to see a series of 4 different videos. The parent will also see this as well. And so when they get into the onboarding, so you'll see whether, we've tried to combine the sections as much as possible, especially if they're seeing the same information. So in this, they'll see a video about what the FAFSA form is. Then they'll see what a contributor information is. There's a video on that, as well as some information of what to expect, how long the application may take. The FAFSA does have to, as any federal form, does have to report as to how much time it'll take an applicant to complete the form. FAFSA does say 1 hour, but I've seen 30 minutes or so per contributor for first-time applicants. And then like I said, I've seen some students and parents complete their sections in less than 10 minutes. And that's all because of the direct data exchange. And then they'll see their after submitting form as to what are the next additional steps that will happen. FAFSA processing, email confirmations, etc. So with that, we'll go over the student identity information. So this is the only thing that's going to be pre-filled right now, even if you essentially are working with students who are renewing an application, so to speak, because of all the updates to the 24-25 year. Again, this is the only thing that will transfer over. Further, Student Aid has mentioned that when students are completing their 25-26 year and beyond and they're renewing their application, a lot more information will um, sort of be pre-filled. As to what that will be pre-filled is to be determined, but they did mention that much information will get pre-filled. So it'll make the renewal application experience much quicker for a lot of students. So you'll see that they have their name, date of birth. They only see the last 4 digits of their social, email address, phone number, etc. So double check this information, make sure everything is okay. If they need to make any changes, they need to go under the account settings here, and they can make changes to their FSA ID. But they can't make changes to it on this page. It'll just get transferred over to the FSA ID section of the studentaid.gov website. And so here they'll see their address information. So they should enter their permanent address on here to ensure all of that is updated and correct. Things to note on here is that you can be working with a student who is at risk of being homeless or is currently experiencing homelessness and they have no stable address. You just want to make sure that they're providing an address on here that they can reliably receive mail. Because what can happen is if the student doesn't receive an electronic version of their FAFSA submission summary, which is renamed for the student aid report, the SAR. So again, that's been renamed to FAFSA submission summary. So they'll be emailing those. So in the event that the student can't receive it via email, they're going to be physically mailing those out to the student. So you just want to make sure that they're inputting a reliable mailing address on here. And then the student will see their state of legal residence question. So and this parent will also see this same question on here. So this is not asking about the student's immigration status. This often comes up every FAFSA year. This is just asking where the student currently resides in, which U.S. state, and when they started living in that state. So they enter that month and year to the best of their knowledge. And a lot of students, I know, like for me, I've lived in Illinois my whole life, so I simply just put the month and year I was born, right? But for some other students, it's not that simple. So they can just use that to the best of their knowledge. Since this is a federal form, the FAFSA doesn't know each and every state's requirement for being considered a resident of that state. Just know for financial aid purposes, if the student is dependent, meaning they have to provide information on their parents, again, we'll go over that much later. It's going to depend on where their parents reside. So if their parents make Illinois their fixed and permanent home, even if they just moved to Illinois, the student is considered an Illinois resident. Now, if the student is independent, meaning they don't have to provide information on their parents, they just have to provide information on themselves and of their spouse if they're married, then they have to wait 12 continuous months if they just made themselves an Illinois resident. So if they wait those 12 continuous months prior to applying for financial aid, right? So that is something that students do, that little bit of a difference I have to make. So this is just referring to the state, the U.S. state of residence. So then once they get into that, they will see the consent and approval. I know it's going to be hard to see when this is not mentioned. Just kind of show you what that looks like. And just know this is for parents as well. Because all contributors, the student being the main contributor, have to provide consent to have their tax information automatically transferred from the IRS. Now, there are some moments similar to in the past with the IRS data retrieval tool that there are some updates happening on the back end. A student may not see the consent form and will have to manually enter their information. I've also seen some students who've consented to this and would still have to manually enter their information. So it could be some glitches still happening, or in the back end, IRS updating their information. So certainly they will communicate to the student when the IRS is making updates on it on the FAFSA main page. Or it's just not available for them for, again, glitches or for some odd reason. You just want to make sure that if the students manually enter their information and didn't consent, they can always go back and provide consent. And what's going to happen when they do that, it's going to override the data that they manually entered. Okay. Because again, if consent is not provided, a student aid index will not be calculated. The student is not going to be eligible for federal student aid, and a student again will be required to manually input that information. What happens when you manually input tax information is that it's going to significantly increase the odds of being verified for income versus if you use the the direct data exchange, the DDX tool, it's going to remove that 100%. Why? Because that is coming directly from the IRS. Students and parents will not be able to see that numerical value. In fact, they also won't even be told that whatever item that they're looking at it was pulled from the IRS. They just won't know that at all. And that is again to protect the identity of that taxpayer. So personal circumstances will look into the student's status to review which questions of their eligibility for federal student aid. So their first is their marital status. So students who are inputting this information, and most students who are under the age of 24 are going to be considered dependent students. And so we're not quite, this is somewhat of the dependency section that we like to get into, but you just want to make sure that they're inputting their legal marital status. Now, their social media status, this comes up almost yearly where we have students that are inputting, well, I'm going to input in a relationship or married because my girlfriend, I don't want her to get mad at me, or my partner, whatever it may be. One thing is for sure, it's a lot harder to prove you've not been married than you've been married, and schools do verify this information. And this is the college or career plans. So this for the 2024-25 year, what would the student's college grade level be? And for students, even if they are graduating high school with an associate's degree or with college credits, they're going to check that first box if they're a first year freshman, regardless of how many college credits they have coming in because they haven't used federal financial aid. And of course, when they're renewing their FAFSA, they can update their status, whatever their amount of credit hours make them to be. And then when you begin the 24-25 school year, will they have their first bachelor's degree? Check no for this question if the student is not working on a graduate degree. Because what ends up happening if you have a student, especially a high school senior, they're completing this, I often check if I know they're eligible for MAP and Pell and they didn't receive it on their either financial aid offer or for federal student aid, we didn't see it on their FAFSA submission summary. I look to see how they answer these questions because chances are they may have already said, well, I already have a bachelor's degree, or I'm working on my graduate degree when they're an incoming college freshman. So it's something to kind of look at to make sure students are completing correctly. And then we're going over to the personal circumstances. This is an overview. We're going to go through each and one of these questions, but I just wanted to showcase this is sort of what it looks like on there so that you can see exactly what the questions look like. So first question is currently serving on active duty. So the student is currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training. So we can see also the notes that are being referenced. So I know in the beginning I mentioned that we were going over the paper version. I meant to just say we were using the paper version for the notes, and in the student section, when you manually have to enter information, we're using the paper version notes for that so we can see the questions. I just want to provide that clarification because I misspoke earlier. And so when we see the notes, we see that, and of course that even on the paper and the online version, there's a check mark where you can check in and see the same notes. But I just use the paper version for this reason. As you can select a box if you are currently serving in the U.S. Armed Forces or a National Guard or Reserve enlistee who is in active duty for other than state or training purposes. Do not check this box if you are a National Guard or Reserve enlistee who is on active duty for state or training purposes. Then we have the student's veteran status. So is the student a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? Select this box if you are engaged in active duty, including basic training in the U.S. Armed Forces, or a National Guard or Reserve enlistee who is called to active duty for other than state or training purposes, or were a cadet or midshipman at one of the service academies and were released under a condition other than dishonorable. Also select the box if you're not a veteran now, but will be by June 30th of 2025. So some additional notes on that. So keep in mind, this is on the student status, and for the most part, your students won't be checking those boxes, especially if they're in high school. So students without biological parents, so there are 3 questions that pertain to this. So at first is at any time since you turned the age 13 where you're an orphan, meaning no biological or adoptive parent living. The second question is at any time since you turned the age 13 where you're a ward of the court. And the last question, at any time since you turned the age of 13, were you in foster care? So keep in mind, this is at any time since they turned the age of 13, even if this is not going to be applicable, but even if they were in foster care for 1 day, or they were the ward of court for a month, so to speak, as that situation was being figured out for that student, they'll be able to check yes to that question because it asks at any time since the student turned age 13. So let's look at first orphan, the notes. Select this box if at any time you turned 13, you had no living parent and you are now, even if you are now adopted. So for ward of the court, select this box if at any time you turned 13, you were a dependent or ward of the court, even if you are no longer a dependent or ward of the court today. For federal student aid purposes, someone who is incarcerated is not considered ward of the court. Foster care, select this box if at any time since you turned 13, you were in foster care, even if you are no longer in foster care today. If you are not sure if you were in foster care, they can check that link on there and it will give them more information. They need to contact an agency for that. Then we have information on emancipated minor. The student is or was legally an emancipated minor as determined by a court in their state of legal residence. So emancipation, so select this box if you can provide a copy of a court's decision that as of today, you are an emancipated minor. Also select this box if you can provide a copy of a court's decision that you were an emancipated minor immediately before you reach the age of being an adult in your state. The court must be located in the state of your legal residence at the time the court's decision was issued. So this can change. A student may be living in a new state. However, they received that emancipation from the state of the legal residence at the time they're living at that state. So that's valid. Do not select this box if you are still a minor and the court decision is no longer in effect or a court decision was not in effect at the time you became an adult. So I have students ask me all the time as to what this means. What is considered being an emancipated minor? It's essentially, legally, a divorcing of your parents, meaning you can provide your own support before the student turns age 18. And a lot of students say, well, I'm providing my own support. Like I have a job, I make money, but this is a court process, right? They have to go to court, get this emancipation. So once I read that definition, and this goes to really anything a student or parent is asking for as to what this is, chances are they don't have it or it's not applicable to them. But I still like to explain it so that they know what it is. Then have legal guardianship. There's also some notes for this. Excuse me. The student is or was in a legal guardianship with someone other than their parent or step-parent as determined by a court in their state of residence. So there's some notes. The definition of legal guardianship does not include your parents, even if they're appointed by a court to be your guardians. You are also not considered a legal guardian of yourself. Select this box if you can provide a copy of a court's decision that as of today, you are in a legal guardianship. Also select this box if you can provide a copy of a court's decision that you were in a legal guardianship immediately before you reach the age of being an adult in your state. The court must be located in the state of legal residence at the time the court's decision was issued. Do not select this box if you're still a minor and the court decision is no longer in effect, or the court decision was not in effect at the time you became an adult. Also leave this box blank and contact your school if custody was awarded by the courts and the court papers say custody and not guardianship. If you meet any of these conditions, the financial aid administrator at your school may require you to provide proof that you were in foster care, dependent, ward of the court, emancipated minor, or an illegal guardianship. So, of course, some of these notes pertain to multiple sections of the dependency questions, multiple questions, I should say, within the dependency questions, because as we did the overview, they're all included on there. And so what the FAFSA did this year is they really expanded on certain sections to let students know that and because I know I've always told students this, and I've told professionals that I'm working with to tell students this, that if they check box any yes to any of these boxes, chances are they're going to get verified. The school will like to receive copies of the documentation to verify that the student is an independent student meeting whichever qualifications that they've entered on there. And so certainly I like that. They're very welcoming that they're mentioning the student. Provide copies, have copies. So if you are working with the student, it's helpful to work with them to obtain those copies so that in the event they do get verified, that information is right there ready for them. And so the student will also see the other circumstances question. So this one's pertaining to the students either experiencing homelessness or at risk of being homeless. So they will see this question at any time. Again, this is at any time question. So even it's for 1 day or it's no longer applicable. But as long as on or after July 1st of 2023, the student was unaccompanied and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. So students for federal and state financial aid purposes have to meet both of those definitions of homeless and unaccompanied. So I've included them on this slide. I'll go over them. Homeless means lacking fixed, regular, and adequate housing. You may be homeless if you're living in shelters, parks, motels, hotels, public spaces, camping grounds, cars, abandoned buildings, or temporarily living with other people because you have nowhere else to go, so known as doubling up. Also, if you're living in any of these situations and fleeing an abusive parent, you may be considered homeless even if your parent would otherwise provide a place for you to live. Unaccompanied means you are not living in the physical custody of your parent or guardian. If you selected yes to being unaccompanied and homeless, or unaccompanied and self-supporting and at risk of being homeless, at any time on or after July 1st, select the appropriate box if you receive a determination to that effect. So we'll talk about those determination letters in the next slide as there have been some updates to it. The financial aid administrator at your college may ask you for a copy of that determination. So again, that verification piece. If you answered yes but did not receive a determination from that school, they should select that none of these apply and contact their financial aid administrator at their school. That person can determine if you are homeless and therefore not required to provide parent information. What we've also seen is that some, and this is only applicable to schools in Illinois, public institutions 4 year and 2 years, that schools, the financial aid administrators may also be the school's Illinois house liaison. And what that means is that they can help connect the student to additional resources if they've identified that they're at risk of being homeless or they check yes to this question. I tell students that even if they don't have a determination letter, because maybe they're still in the custody of their parents, or maybe they just have a fluid living situation, if they're experiencing a fluid living situation, to contact the financial aid administrator at the school, letting them know what's going on. And if they're not the house liaison, they can connect them to someone that can help provide resources for that student on campus. So student has to meet both definitions. So you can have a student who's living in a homeless shelter with their parents, but they're still obviously homeless or experiencing homelessness. So in a situation like that, the student is not unaccompanied. So they can essentially still provide parent information. So for this purpose, for the determination letter, the student needs to meet both of those definitions of homeless or homeless and unaccompanied. So if a student checks yes to this question, they will see the remaining homeless youth determination questions. So a student, again, can say yes to this question and may not have a determination because they don't have one. They can still seek one, but at the moment they're completing their FAFSA, they don't have one. And so I still recommend students, if they are experiencing homelessness, to check yes to this question, to check none of these answers, none of these apply, and to follow up with the school in case they're not already following up with the student already. So did any of the following determine the student was homeless or at risk of being homeless? So this is the determination letter component. And again, students are going to be required to submit a copy of this. And these are updated for 24-25 year. The direct or designee of an emergency or transitional shelter, street outreach program, homeless youth drop-in center, or other program serving those experiencing homelessness. The student's high school or school district homeless liaison or designee. The director or designee of a project supported by a federal TRIO or GREER program, as well as a financial aid administrator. So if they have any one of those determination letters already, they can check that box. And what's also new is that institutions can also use a determination at another institution and can accept that as supporting documentation. So when it comes to unusual circumstances, so a situation like this, These are for students whose parents refuse to provide information. Um, and so you can have a student, and some examples, you can have students who are either unwilling to provide information. So all these examples won't qualify for a student that I have on this slide. But unusual circumstances for a student who may not be able to answer yes to any of the dependency questions that will make them an independent student, but they still have a unique situation that may qualify them for a dependency override, meaning the institution, financial aid office, may exercise professional judgment to override the student's dependency status to make them an independent student with supporting documentation. As long as everything is in line, they approve it with their policies and procedures in place, a student can be considered independent and not be required to provide parent information. So I've highlighted the unacceptable reasons on here, and I also go over the acceptable reasons that the FAFSA calls out. So unacceptable reasons, you have parents who are unwilling to provide information. It's quite common, more than you think. This is where I explain to parents all the time that just because you're required to enter information on the FAFSA doesn't require you to pay for your student's education. They're primarily responsible for paying for that, not the parent. Parents refusing to pay for college, parents who do not claim the student on their taxes, and students who also don't live with their parents. So all these are examples of unacceptable reasons for an unusual circumstance. Some acceptable reasons, which are highlighted on here in the FAFSA, include um, students who've left their home, they ran away from home because the parents were abusive. They were abandoned or estranged from their parents and have not been adopted. They are a refugee or an asylum status and are separated from their parents or because their parents are displaced in a foreign country. They're a victim of human trafficking. They are incarcerated or their parents are incarcerated, and contact with their parents would pose a risk to the student, or they're otherwise unable to contact or locate their parents and have not been adopted, meaning they don't know where their parents are and have no contact with their parents. So if the student checks no to this question, they'll go ahead and enter their parent information. If they check yes to this question, they will see this bubble, not bubble, but this next page, which indicate that they may be considered a provisionally independent student. So to finish completing this application, they need to reach out to their financial aid administrator at the school that they're applying to or listing on the FAFSA. Now, what happens, this is what's different than from what happened in the past, is that if a student needed a dependency override, they will not see their financial aid eligibility. Pell Grant estimate in the past was EFC, expected family contribution, so they wouldn't see their EFC. Now, when a student completes that as a provisional independent student, they will see their student aid index. It'll indicate that it's a provisional SAI, so it'll tell them this is what your provisional student aid index is. This is what your Pell Grant estimate is. In order for this to be final, they need to finalize this information with their financial aid office. So that still needs to be complete. However, it gives the student an idea as to what they're eligible for. So the students will also see, and we're seeing a lot of confusion with this out on the field. Student will see their student dependency status. So here it also indicate that if the student didn't indicate yes, didn't see the provisional dependent window, they will see, okay, well, you've indicated you don't have an unusual circumstance. You are a dependent student, meaning you have to provide information on your parents. Are you applying for a direct unsubsidized loan only? If a student checks yes to this question, what it's telling the FAFSA is, my parents don't want to contribute their information. So I'm only going to apply for an unsubsidized loan only. When a student checks no to this question, when a student completes a FAFSA, they're applying for all the federal student aid that's required from them. That's eligible to them when they complete the FAFSA. Okay, let's kind of get that out of the way. This is just for students who are unable to provide parent information because their parents don't want to contribute their information. So student is only applying for unsubsidized loans only. So for most students, they're going to check no for this question. I know the way it's worded, it's rather confusing. We've seen this come up plenty of times. And so even when I saw this for the first time, because this was different from the draft versions that the FAFSA was releasing prior to the December date. So when we saw this for the first time, a lot of us were confused about this because just the way the question is worded. So just know that for most students, they're going to check no to this question. So let's start getting into who is a parent for purposes of financial aid. This is the same for state financial aid programs as well. And so who is considered a parent is the adoptive parent, the biological parent, and step parents if they're married to the biological and adoptive parent. So if both parents, biological and adoptive, are unmarried but living together, they have to report information for both of those parents. If a student that has divorced parents, they have to provide information of that parent who provides the most financial support in the last 12 months. For some students, this could be different from their living situation, meaning you have a student living with one parent and they have to report information on another parent with whom they don't live with. On top of that, if that other parent is remarried, then they have to provide information on that step parent as well. But for most students, they're going to be reporting the parent with whom they live with because that is the parent who's providing the most financial support. Because if we think about it, especially right now with inflation, housing, rent, mortgage, whatever, is the single highest expense that we all have. Unless you have small kids in daycare, and then that sometimes can be a lot higher than someone's mortgage, or rent in some areas. But anyway, so that is going to be the single most expensive thing. And if you have parents that are, well, everything that we do is equal, if that happens, then the student will have to report which parent has the greater income and assets. So again, that could be different from their parents' living situation, from the student's living situation. So we'll go over that in the parent wizard tool. So in this wizard tool, and this is for the student to help them in determining which parent they have to report on there. So they ask them, is your parents married to each other? If they check yes to this question, well, guess what? They have to provide information on both of their parents. And if both of their parents, if their parents filed married joint returns, then only one parent needs to sign with their FSA ID, meaning they don't have to invite the other parent as a contributor. However, if the parents are married, live together, but they filed separate returns, then whichever parent is there, maybe both parents are there, they have to invite each other as contributors. The student can invite both of them, but just know that depending on the parent's tax filing status, they may have to invite the other parent as a contributor. So going into the remaining questions, so the student maybe answered, no, my parents aren't married. They may indicate, well, if the biological parents are living together, but they're not married, they still have to provide information for both parents, meaning both parents need to be invited as contributors. And so maybe they check no, that, well, they're not married, they're not living together. So maybe you have a situation where the student is living with mom or dad and the other parent is providing child support. And so what we'll see this following question is, did one parent provide more financial support than the other in the past 12 months? What we've kind of already reviewed. And if they answered yes, then they have to provide information on that parent. If it's no, meaning it's even, then they have to kind of determine which of those parents provided more financial support. Otherwise, it's going to be that parent with the greater income and assets. Because that last following question, if that parent remarried, so say if I'm filling out my FAFSA for my daughter and me and my wife separate, say my daughter's living with mom, but I'm providing more financial support and now I'm remarried. So now my daughter, Natalia, has to report my information as well as her step parents' information as well. Okay. So that's why that question asks if that parent got remarried. So this is kind of what that invite page looks like. So once the student determines with their parent wizard tool, which parents they need to invite as contributors, they can invite them as contributors. They're entering their first name, last name. I tell students this all the time. Take your time with this. Make sure you have all your parents' information. That's why it's still helpful to have both parents there in a financial aid application completion workshop. Enter their date of birth, their social security number as it appears on their social security card, email address as the same one that they've used to create their FSA ID. Now, what's new this year is that parents without social security numbers can create an FSA ID, as everyone is required to have an FSA ID now. They can check that box. My parents don't have an SSN, and they have to input their address, city, state, their mailing address, essentially. And what I tell students all the time is make sure that this matches with what your parents used to create their FSA ID. What I've seen is younger kids love to abbreviate. Parents don't. I'm already seeing that because I used to abbreviate all the time, and now I'm not abbreviating. I don't know if it's just an age thing. As you reach a certain age, you just stop abbreviating. I'm not sure. Maybe that's just me, but that has to that if it's not matching, that could cause some problems when it comes to inviting contributors. So to minimize any issues, make sure everything is matching, especially first name, last name, date of birth, social security number if they have one. But if they check that box that they don't have a social, then that social security number box will be grayed out. I mean, they won't be able to enter anything in there. So nothing else is supposed to go in there. And then we're getting into the student demographics section. So student now knows, okay, I've invited my contributors, that email is going out, they receive that automatically. Now the student is entering some information that won't impact their federal student aid eligibility. In fact, they have to answer this, but if they don't want to, if they don't want to answer a specific response for this, they can always select prefer not to answer this question. And all these are not used to generate eligibility for federal student. It's just used for research purposes. This is not shared with the colleges as well. So the students will have to enter their gender as well as their race and ethnicity. So this is like a two-part question, so I just put them all in this one slide. So similar to the gender question, it's not going to be used for generating eligibility for federal financial aid. It's just used for research purposes. So they enter if they are of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, check that box, and then select their race on top of that. Then we get into the student citizenship status. So they have to enter whether they are a U.S. citizen or national, eligible non-citizen, or they're neither a U.S. citizen nor eligible non-citizen. It's really important that if a student entering exactly as their status is, so if they're U.S. citizen or national, they check that first box. If they have a visa pertaining to what's in this note box, which I'll go over, then they select that second box if they're an eligible non-citizen. Because first of those two boxes, the student will still be eligible for federal student aid. If they check that third box, that's indicating to the FAFSA that they're not eligible for federal student aid. So let's look at the notes. If you are an eligible non-citizen, write in your 8 or 9-digit alien registration number. Generally, you are an eligible non-citizen if you are a permanent U.S. resident with a permanent card, green card resident card, conditional permanent resident with the conditional green card, the holder of an arrival departure record, meaning you have that I-94 stamped. It's been approved, so you have your I-94 form for that. With one of these designations, parolee, refugee, and asylum granted. Not asylum seeker, asylum granted. So I know we're receiving an influx of asylum seekers, especially here in Chicago, where I live, which even in some areas too as well. Just know that they need to have that approval, that I-94 stamp, in order to be eligible for federal student aid. T visa holders, Cuban Asian entrants, as well as a holder of a valid certification or eligibility letter from the Department of Health and Human Services showing a designation of victim of human trafficking. Also, if you've been in the U.S. and have been granted DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or you have an F1 or F2 visa, J1 or J2 visa, or a G series visa, you have to check that third box. You're neither U.S. citizen nor eligible non-citizen because you're not eligible for federal student aid. Essentially somebody with DACA, they have a social security number, so they can technically submit a FAFSA, but they have to make sure they check that third box. We don't recommend students with DACA to complete a FAFSA, especially if they're applying for schools here in Illinois, because we have the alternative application for Illinois financial aid, which they may be eligible to complete. That is specifically for eligible undocumented students. So something to keep in mind. Now, if you have a student that may be applying to an out-of-state college, I always have that student check in with that college to see what form is required of them. When it comes to the parent's education status, so this is determining if the student is a first-generation college student. So whether this parent never attended college, one or two parents attended college but didn't complete, or one parent completed college, or the student doesn't know. So college could be anything: trade school, bachelor's degree, associate's degree, master's degree, or so forth. Notice that there's no distinguish between the highest level of college for the parent. This is new to the 24-25 FAFSA. This is for students' parents who are killed in the line of duty. So was the student's parents killed in the line of duty while serving on active duty as a member of the armed forces on or after September 11th, or they're performing official duties as a public safety officer? So public safety officers include law enforcement, firefighters, or emergency service workers. So again, this is not asking if they are serving in the military or are a police officer, someone who is either killed or they sustain injuries with at least 90% disability. And so parent killed in the line of duty. The question is for this question. A public safety officer includes a law enforcement officer, firefighter, or a chaplain, a federal emergency management agency employee, FEMA, an emergency management or civil defense agency employee, member of a rescue squad or ambulance crew, or others defined in the Omnibus Crime Control and Safety Streets Act of 1968. So then we have the student's the student's high school completion status. So what is the student's high school completion status as of the beginning of the 24-25 school year? High school diploma, state recognized high school equivalent, GED, etc. Whether the student is homeschooled or none of the above. And then the student here will input their high school information. So they'll have to enter it, search it through the box. Keep in mind it may appear different than how the student enters it. And then they have to confirm that information. If they need to go back and make edits to it, they can go back and make that information. But they have to select a college from that box. They can always search again to try to find it. If they have any questions, they can reach out to someone in their high school to help get that correct information. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Tommy, who's going to go over parent and student financials. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Manny. We're going to go ahead and transition now into the financial portion of the application here. Talk about using the direct data exchange first and how those things kind of get transferred over and what students and parents will see. And then we'll go through if for whatever reason, and we'll talk about some of those reasons, if folks have to file manual tax information, what that's going to look like here. Now, this is a section that we have combined student and parent sections into this one financial section. Reason being is because students and parents see the exact same questions basically in terms of their financial portion. So instead of going through student and then parent and you seeing the exact same questions twice, we just combine them, make it a little bit more streamlined and easier to read sort of and understand. So this is the first section that folks will see when they get into the financial portion of the application here. Gives a little bit of an introductory type of screen here explaining to students and parents that this form is being used to determine their ability to pay for college. They need to have this information in order to have an accurate snapshot of their income, investments, etc., to, of course, properly package and award aid. So that's just sort of that intro screen there. And then pretty much right away is when they're going to go ahead and they're going to have that direct data take place and I should say automatically transfer federal tax information onto the application. So what exactly is this tool going to be pulling? And it's all of these following categories you are seeing on your screen. I think a nice part about this too is that you don't even see all the values being transferred over, right? You're not going to see these categories on the application with values next to them. It just happens. And you're not even going to see any of these questions be asked of you because you have tax information with the IRS and you have consented and approved for the direct data exchange to take place. So this is what's being transferred over. Tax filing status, adjusted gross income, right? And then income earned from work, right? Is there anything in addition to that? Think of what's in W-2s and other forms of income here. Family size, that'll be imported. You will have the option to edit that question though. We'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. Taxes paid, this is income tax paid. A lot of people used to see that question in the past and think it's what they received in a federal income tax return, right? What they may be getting in sort of an earned income tax credit. That is not the case. This is any federal taxes paid. Educational credits, any untaxed IRA distributions, tax exempt interest, any untaxed pension amounts, Schedule C, net profit losses, and then any indicators for the following letter schedules. There are a ton of letter schedules out there. Don't ask me what they all mean. I do not know. I am not a tax expert, so to say, but I do know they exist on there. We do common to see some of these schedules involved in a 1040 form. So any indicators for those letter schedules you see there on your screen would be relevant. So again, once the direct data exchange takes place, all those indicators, all those categories I was just naming to you, you don't even see those values get transferred over. This is all you would see then, basically, in terms of answering financial information yourselves, right? And to be quite frank with you all, the large majority of families that I have worked with on the ground really only see the bottom two questions. So it just kind of depends on the family and the student's situation here. With the enhanced skip logic of the FAFSA, everyone can kind of see a different amount of questions be asked of them. So the first one you may see would be IRA rollovers into, say, another IRA or a qualified retirement plan. Those get reported in that section. Did the student or parent earn earned income tax credit is another question that we have seen be asked. And then we have the amount of college grants, scholarships, and AmeriCorps benefits reported to the IRS as income. That's asked for both students and parents. And then any foreign earned income exclusion. I will say in my time here working in financial aid, going on 5 years now, those bottom two questions, I have yet to see a family put a value there, but that's just because of the folks that we usually work with there. Have them go through that question, see if it applies to them when you're working with them. Typically, if they don't know what it is, they don't have it. Now, after that screen, some families might see the typical investment asset questions that we'd be used to in the past, right? Cash savings, checking accounts, any net worth of other real estate or other investments and assets, right? However, now with some of the new exclusions and exceptions you're seeing here on your screen, some of our families won't even see those investment asset questions be asked of them, and then they'd be done with the financial section of the application. So here are the new exceptions that we have carved out, the Department of Ed, I should say, has carved out for those families that may not see investment questions at all. If one of the following three things is true, they're not going to see those questions. The first is if those who make less than $60,000 a year and did not file a Schedule A, B, D, E, F, or H, and they did not file a Schedule C, or they filed a Schedule C with a net business income of more than $10,000 loss or gain. So this is both for dependent students' parents as well as independent students themselves. Or if anyone in the household has received means-tested federal benefit programs within the last 2 years, and the list of that has sort of expanded on the application as well. You'll see when you get into it, they've added a couple of additional things. We're used to things like food stamps, right? SNAP benefits, temporary assistance for needy families, the WIC program for women and infant children, the earned income tax credit. There's a wide variety now of expanded means-tested federal benefit programs on there. And then a student with a negative SAI. Now, how that would be determined pretty quickly on the back end, right, with this new direct data exchange, is that when they click on that consent and approval and that federal tax information gets transferred over, pretty quickly right away, the system is able to calculate if the student has a negative SAI. Common example, you think of those individuals who maybe didn't meet the income threshold to file taxes. Those folks get an automatic negative 1,500 SAI. So pretty quickly they can kind of come up with that, and then they would not be asked asset and investment questions. So if any one of these three things is true, they're not going to see asset and investment questions. Let's say that, okay, none of those three things is true. Then the next couple of screens here you're going to see are going to be asked of that student and family. The first being the annual child support received question. Now, this is put in the asset portion because FSA has determined, okay, anything that is not transferred over from the direct data exchange, we're including in the asset portion of the application. We've gotten some questions as well about, oh, this is child support, like it's cash. It's not an asset. It's been spent already. And that's okay. It's just used for category and organizational purposes here. Also, the child support paid question that we've been used to in the past has been eliminated, right? So only the child support received question has been left on the application. So if families are required to report investments, they will see this question to enter the total amount of child support that the student received or the parent received for the last complete calendar year. If that doesn't apply to that student or family, then you can go ahead and click 0 and move on. And then here are the traditional asset questions, investment questions that we are used to in the past, right? Current total value of cash, savings, and checking accounts, right? You see it says student assets on there, but this is also the exact same questions for parent assets. We just didn't want to put two separate screenshots out there and have you not be able to read what's on the screen. So current total value of cash savings and checking accounts, right? This is an as of today question, right? Again, this application is designed to be a snapshot of the students and families' financial picture, right? So I have worked with families in the past. Today's Thursday, right? Okay, great. They say, all right, well, that total value approximate best guesstimate, right? Maybe there's $1,500 in there. But they'll say, hey, Tommy, look, tomorrow all the bills get paid. That value is not going to be there. So I don't think that's very accurate. What do I do? Well, the form is pretty clear that this is an as of today question, right? We always say you give your best guesstimate. If you're thousands of dollars off, there's a problem. But if you're a couple of dollars off, it's not the biggest of deal, right? It's supposed to be an accurate depiction of your financial picture. So I've told families, listen, if you want to wait till tomorrow to answer this question, that is up to you. It is totally up to them how they want to answer it, but it needs to be an accurate representation of their financial picture. We move on to the current net worth of investments, including real estate. Now, again, we do not include the home in which the student and family live in. That is not the case. So that has not changed from previous years. So what might be maybe included here as investments, right? Including maybe other properties that family owns. Turn your attention maybe to the right portion of your screen. We'll go through the note section of the application, right? So maybe other real estate or rental properties they own, right? Maybe they have a vacation home they own in Florida. Maybe they own another property in a suburb of the Chicagoland area where they're renting it out, right? Those are investments for purposes of financial aid, assuming they have their own entrance, kitchen, bath, etc. Trust funds for students, for example, UGMA and UTMA accounts are common examples, only if the student is designated as the owner of that account, whether that be right now or later in their life. Other common examples of investments that we're used to, right? Money market funds, mutual funds, CDs, stocks, bonds, etc. Those are all investment. And then we get to the final question at the bottom there, which is the current net worth of businesses and investment farms. So now, if we have families who are required to report investments, the net worth of all businesses and all farms must be reported as an investment for purposes of financial aid. Some of you may recall earlier in the past, if you are financial aid sort of veterans here on the call, they had a small business and small farm exception. That if that family owned more than half and had 100 or fewer full-time employees, they did not need to report the value, the net worth, I should say, of their business and investment farm. That exception has been thrown out, right? There have been those 3 new carved asset exceptions. Folks may not even see this question, but if they do see the question, any business and any farm must be reported. Talk a little bit more here, go through the note section here about some other investments that may count, of course. If folks have qualified education savings plans, 529 college savings plans are classic examples that we talk about. There has been a slight change to how you report those. In the past, if that, say, family, let's say dad, right, owns 4 529 college savings plans, that means dad had to report all of those 529 college savings plans, right? The reasoning behind that in the past was, okay, at any point in time, dad as owner can transfer who is going to be the beneficiary of those plans whenever he feels like it, right? That has been changed a little bit. Now, it is only the 529 college savings plans at the time they are filling out the application that they have beneficiary for the student who is applying. Take that same example. We got those 4 college savings plans dad has. Let's say one's designated for the student who's applying. We have another one for niece, another one for nephew, another one from a different child even, for example, right? A sibling. Only that one that's designated for the student who's applying gets reported. So that's a pretty big change for 529 college savings plans. What doesn't count as an investment for purposes of financial aid? Talk a little bit about this in terms of we exclude the home in which the student and family live in, but other things we talk about and we hear a lot, anything involving retirement and anything involving life insurance is not an investment for purposes of financial aid. So keep those things in mind. And here is the kind of more of example here of where you would see that in the notes section. What are those examples of retirement and life insurance plans, right? 401ks, pension funds, annuities, non-education IRAs, individual retirement accounts, KEOG plans, etc. right? And it gives a couple of examples here of some of those business and investment farms and how to report that with some further details about, is the farmland adjacent to your home? Is it across the street for your home? Some specific guidance there for our folks who do have farms. So take a look at that when you go ahead. You're reviewing those investment sections with families here. Having the note section handy from that PDF copy of the FAFSA is handy. We always do so at the training team when we're working with folks in the field. So if we have students and parents who are unable to use the direct data exchange, not that they're choosing not to use the direct data exchange, but they are literally unable to do so, they may be prompted to enter their information manually in terms of their financial section. Who are these individuals? Well, perhaps they are folks who filed a foreign tax return. That would be a situation where they'd be prompted to manually enter tax information. And they're going to have to, of course, convert those currencies into US dollars. Other situations as well, you may have folks whose 2022 situation is no longer accurate as of today, 2024, right? Maybe 2022, moms got their information on FAFSA. In 2022, mom was married filing jointly with dad, for example, right? Fast forward today, 2024, mom's divorced. Right now, she gives consent for the direct data exchange to take place, but they're going to pull a tax return that's no longer accurate as of today. So she'd be prompted then to input her tax information, her financial information in manually because she is divorced. That'd be one. We talked about the foreign tax return. That'd be two. Another really common example you would see out in the field is if you have folks who created their FSA IDs the exact same day they are trying to complete the application. Manny talked about this a little bit earlier in the presentation, right? Being very important that folks create their FSA IDs ahead of time to ensure that those things get verified so that the process for applying for financial aid looks as normal as it possibly can. So it is not uncommon that I have worked with students and families out in the field, and I have told them, listen, we've gotten halfway through the application. I understand you want to keep going. It prompts them to manually do this process when I know that the direct data exchange should be able to do this no problem, right? Once their FSA ID gets verified, all that tax information gets transferred over and life should be grand. Even if folks decide to manually input their tax information, right? In 1, 2, 3 days max, like they say, 1 to 3 days for that FSA ID to get verified, all the information being transferred over from the IRS is going to override whatever they put in manually anyway. So it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to do so. So I try and explain that to them. I have them save, come back in a day or two. But of course, it's up to them how they want to fill out the application. If they want to keep going and get it done as much as possible, they have the option to do so. So those are the 3 reasons you may see folks be prompted to enter manual tax information. So what is that going to look like then, right? I'll just take you through some of these questions in which we talked about earlier. What gets pulled from the direct data exchange? These are some of the categories you're going to see. Now you're seeing screenshots from the paper FAFSA. Reason being is because the Department of Ed has not released screenshots of what it looks like on the web for those who are prompted to answer manual tax information. So we just pulled this from the PDF copy. It is the exact same questions they're going to see on the web. It just looks slightly different. So they would, of course, answer their filing status for the 2022 year. And then they would go ahead and indicate what that would be here. Again, we still have student and parent combined here like we would for the on the web because, again, they're asked the exact same question. Here are some of the individual categories for tax return information in terms of income earned from work. Now, if you do have folks manually entering this information here, very important to sort of follow the line numbers that they give you. It tries to give it as clear as possible in terms of a step-by-step process of exactly where these values are on their 1040 form, right? So income earned from work, excuse me, I see IRS form 1040, line, I think it says 1Z plus schedule 1. Like you can see how it gives you those values in order to get the accurate value that they're looking for. Untaxed portions of IRA distributions, we talked about that, as well as pensions, the adjusted gross income, tax exempt interest income, the IRA rollovers into another qualified plan, pension rollovers as well, and then any income tax paid. It will ask about them receiving the earned income tax credit. Again, this being one of those means tested federal benefit programs, for example, right? So that's a pretty important question there. And then other IRA deductions and payments to self-employed plans like the SEP, Simple, or KEOG plans, or any other qualified plan there. Gives them where they can find that on their IRS 1040 form. Gives them that spot to report education credits, right? Whether it's American Opportunity, Lifetime Learning Credits, and if they filed one of those letter schedules indicated in the question, A, B, D, E, F, or H. Amount of college grants and scholarship aid reported to the IRS as income. Any net profit or loss from their Schedule C if they filed one, and then the foreign earned income tax exclusion here, right? So it gives a little bit more clearly of examples of what it is in the notes section here. Again, it has to be reported to the IRS as income here, and it gives, is it AmeriCorps benefits? That would include awards, living allowances, as well as interest accrual payments. All right, so that is sort of the financial portion of the application. I will say with the direct data exchange, when the FAFSA works, it really does streamline the process. We have seen folks complete it in as little as 15 to 20 minutes because the financial section is so streamlined now. So when it works and it takes place, it is a positive change, I will say. So now let's just go ahead and transfer it over to students selecting their colleges. Gives them a little bit of an intro screen here, and they can go ahead and hit continue. Now, students are now able to select up to 20 schools here on the web versus previous years, they were only allowed to input 10. Now, this should eliminate the need for students in the past, right, who had more than 10 schools they were applying to or even interested in applying in, right? They'd have to go in, right, input their 10 schools, let the FAFSA process successfully in normal times, that's 3 to 5 days, then go back in and make a correction. Delete those 10 schools, and they can add another 5, 6, 7, or 10 schools that they wanted to have those schools receive their FAFSA data here. Hopefully with this new change in terms of students being allowed to input 20 schools on the application, it should be a one and done process, right? I think if I was working with a student who was trying to apply to more than 20 schools, I probably would have a conversation with that student to kind of understand, well, why is that being the case? Let's try and narrow down some of these options a little bit here. What are we trying to gain out of doing so? But of course, if they want to, they have the freedom to do so, and they would follow the exact same process as they would in previous years. So you can see here how they would search schools, just like they would in the past. Not a lot of this has changed in terms of searching by the state, the city, and the school name. One issue that the FSA, the Department of Ed, has sort of indicated in their key issues open alert page is that a lot of times these schools are been truncated when they get those search results in. For example, in January, I was helping a student, I think, try and search University of Illinois, Chicago. And there were 30 different UICs on there, right? And they had different program names next to them, graduate type schools, things. A lot of them looked very similar, and it was hard to tell which school was actually the correct institution. And of course, when students are selecting what colleges they want to send it to, we got to make sure that, of course, it's the right institutions. Otherwise, they're not going to receive the information, and they're not even going to know that happens then, right? So very important that gets correct. FSA has recommended, they are aware of this issue, and to just go ahead and input those institutions by the federal school code. I will say that is a pretty easy Google search to search up the federal school code. The FSA Partners website also has a complete list of all the federal school codes. So we have found that to be an easier way to make sure that we are accurately helping students, for example, input the correct institutions on their college search page. And now we're getting close to the end of the student section here. This is the review page, right? Parents and students see the exact same thing here. I would have students and parents double and triple check each one of these categories and make sure that this information is correct. It is not uncommon for students and parents to get here and just kind of scroll down and hit continue. I get it. I do the same thing. I'll be honest. Like in my past life doing FAFSAs, that's what I would do. But because of some of the issues with the FAFSA, how buggy and all the technical glitches that have been going on with the new rollout, some of these things have been altered when they get here. Sometimes signatures are getting deleted. Sometimes the country question in the past was getting deleted, right? Certain things have been maybe altered for whatever reason. No harm or foul or fault to the student. It's just the technological glitches of the site doing so. So we have folks double, triple check that everything looks correct, the way they inputted it, making sure every question has an answer that needs an answer, and then they can go ahead and hit continue. Then they're going to have a little review page here about, okay, you did invite those contributors. Manny showed you how that looked earlier. Now we're just waiting on parent contributors to input their information in their section of the application. They do have the ability to edit this if for whatever reason this is incorrect. Maybe they only had one parent contributor here and they realize, oh no, I have a married filing separately set of parents here. I need to make sure that the other parent receives an invitation as well, right? Whatever that reason may be, they have the ability to edit the information here on the screen. And then student goes ahead and signs by just clicking that little box sort of in the left portion of your screen that says I agree to the terms outlined above. And then they are submitting their signature, not the application. Very important, because once they do that, they're going to see this, that their section has been complete. The application has not been completed, just their section, right? So this is them just signing their section and moving on and waiting for parents to complete their own sections here, right? Explains the requirements for dependent students needing parental information here, their contributors. It shows them once again that parents have been sent that invitation here. And then it shows them how they can just check their email when they get, a confirmation email. They can check on the status of their parents completing their section here. So lots of additional sort of review information for students to review. So now we'll go ahead and we'll transition over to the parent side of the application here. So when parents get an invitation sent to them in that email, right, this is an example of what that might look like, right? We have contributor's first name. This would be the parent, for example, here. Hey, so-and-so, student Raya has invited you to complete your section of the application. Student Raya is not going to be eligible for aid unless you do so, right? Doing so is going to provide her with a variety of need-based aid, loans. Here's the information we need from you. Great. Now, if that parent has an FSA ID already, hopefully, that's been verified, it's going to prompt them to log in right away. Only other difference here is if you have parents who have not created their FSA IDs yet, again, that's okay. It'll prompt them to go ahead and create an FSA ID. Even if they go to the FSA ID creation page on studentaid.gov, there is a little bar in the middle of where that login section is that says create an account. And that's where parents can also go ahead and just create their FSA IDs if they do not already have one. So again, here's where they log in, right? Just like the student would, right? You can see that little box in the left-hand corner that would say, all right, if you need to troubleshoot your FSA ID, for example, or if you need to create one from scratch, that's where they would be able to do so. I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with, all contributors, right? Parents, students, spouses, etc., that, create FSA IDs, and of course they don't remember their login information, and the troubleshooting is always sort of a hassle. It can take some time to do so. So really important that folks are writing down, keeping track of their login information here. It will make life a lot easier for them. Now, we have been aware of some issues in terms of some of these invitations maybe not connecting right away. Maybe they don't get the email, for example, or if they do get the email, the login prompt button isn't working. We have seen some of that issues in the past. FSA has addressed those things. But for whatever reason, if that is coming up as an issue, parents can just log in themselves without using that invitation email. And they'll click on that My Activity section. It'll be one of the first things they see when they log in. And they'll see that they have an active application, an active invitation from their student to go ahead, accept the invitation, get started, and complete their section of the application. Here is a wide variety of demographic, introductory information here for parent contributing their portion of the application here, why they're doing it, right? It can't be completed without them. A lot of frequently asked questions here. What happens if they don't complete their sections, etc. So they can go ahead and review all this information here, hit continue when they are ready. Here's the identity information here, right? Just like it would be for the student. They cannot edit this information here if it's incorrect. Very important, they double, triple check that this information is correct, because if it's not, they have to go back out into their account settings, you'll see in that highlighted box, into their FSA ID account specifically to edit their account information. Once they do that, then it'll populate here correctly, right? So birthday, names, phone numbers, all those things, specifically social security numbers, triple check those, because when those are incorrect, correcting that can be a nightmare as well. So I always have parents really look at this and make sure that this is correct. They will not be able to edit that here. They'll have to go back to their account settings to edit the information. Identity information continued here. This is where we have their permanent mailing address. This will be pre-populated based on what they put in their FSA ID. However, they do have the option here to edit that if need be. So we have, permanent mailing address, city, state, zip code, and country, the exact same way it looked for the student. 1 second here to take a drink of water. Okay, so a very important piece in terms of the parent section of the application is the parental consent and approval. Manny touched on this process a little bit when he went through it with students and sort of the introductory information to this presentation. But again, the new direct data exchange requires that every single contributor must give consent and approval in order for federal tax information to be transferred over, or in terms of them getting aid in the beginning. I mean, if no consent is provided from all contributors, the student's ineligible for any aid whatsoever, right? Which means an SAI is not going to be calculated for them. Thus, they're not going to see an estimated Pell Grant. And then, of course, they're going to be ineligible for federal financial aid. So it's really, really important here for parents to hit that consent and approval button. Again, this is even if you have folks who didn't file taxes. That's okay. Again, the IRS is only going to tell the Department of Ed, hey, we have something here, here it is, or we don't have anything, and that's it. That's okay, right? Some folks are not required to file taxes, for example. Maybe they didn't meet the income threshold. Not a problem, right? They just need to give consent for the IRS and the Department of Education to talk to see, is there anything for us to transfer over here so that this is verified information, right? Now, if parents, for whatever reason, right, they don't provide consent and approval, they decline it, it will let them continue on with the application, but it's going to prompt them to input tax information manually, right? And there's no point in them really doing so if they're not going to provide consent, right? Every time they continue on with the application, trying to manually input their tax information, a warning screen is going to pop up. Each time they try and move on, say, hey, so-and-so parent contributor, there's no point in you doing what you're doing. You have to give consent in order for this to even count, right? Like, there's no point in them continuing on. They do give them the option to if they want to, but there's really no point in doing so. Really important that they give consent and approval here. You may deal with parents who are skeptical of this for whatever reason, and I just try to reassure parents that, hey, this is information they already have. It's already given to them. Like, there's nothing for you to hide if it's already out there. It's just a simple, better conversation between the IRS and the Department of Ed to just take this information that they already have and put it on the application to save you some time, make sure this information is verified, and save you the verification headache later. So very important, all contributors must give consent. There is no exceptions to this. Okay, we're now in the demographic section here of the application, asking parents similar questions from the student in terms of marital status, legal residence, date of residence, etc. So here's the marital status question and what it looks like for parents here, where they can indicate they are single, if they have folks that are unmarried but living together, married but not separated, remarried, separated, divorced, and widowed. Right now, again, keep in mind in a couple of these instances here, if we have unmarried parents but living together, or if we have folks that file married filing separately, both of those parents now need to create FSA IDs. Both need to log in to give consent and approval. Both are going to get invitations to complete sections of the application, right? Very important that happens. Again, if both parents don't do that in that situation, student doesn't get any aid. Really important. Here's the state of legal residency question, just as it was asked for the student. Again, this is not asking about parent immigration status, right? Citizenship questions, immigration status is never asked of parents on the FAFSA. It is not relevant for purposes of financial aid. This is just where parents have made their true fixed and permanent home, right? So whenever they started living in their current state. For some parents, and particularly for students more often, sometimes it's when they were born, right? Some people have been here their whole lives. Totally fine. They just put when their birthday was. And for other folks, they have moved here 15, 20 years ago for whatever reason. It's whenever they started living here in the state of Illinois, for our purposes, right? That's what this question is asking. So we talked a little bit here on financials here. I just want to show you some additional things for parents here, right? It's the exact same introductory screen that we saw earlier here. But the means tested federal benefit programs is pretty specific in terms of what parents might see, right? Again, this is also an indicator, if we recall, of one of those asset exceptions, right? If they did receive any of these means tested benefit programs in the last 2 years, they're not going to see the asset questions, cash savings checkings, other real estate, businesses and farms, those questions. If one of these things is true and is an indicator for this family, they will not see those questions. So here they are. And I mentioned that it also expanded as well. Things we're used to seeing on there, right? I mentioned food stamps, temporary assistance for needy families. Some additions you might see on here would be the earned income tax credit, federal housing assistance, free and reduced lunch. Very important that free and reduced lunch, they have to meet the federal definition of what it means to receive free and reduced lunch, because there is an income requirement attached to that. That's pretty relevant in terms of what we may deal with here in the state of Illinois. Chicago Public Schools, for example, there is no requirement in their program. They just give all of their students free and reduced lunch. That doesn't meet the federal requirement because there's an income thing attached to that. So very important we double check that they have to meet federal definitions of these programs. We see Medicaid on there, supplemental security income. Some of these things have been in there in the past, some have been added. So you can see it's been expanded and a variety of options for parents to choose from. The tax filing status here, right? Did they file a joint tax return with their spouse? Again, if they filed jointly, this is the one instance where you really only need one parent with an FSA ID and one parent signature, because then if they filed jointly, the IRS only needs consent from that one parent, and that one parent can input other demographic information for their spouse. Here's the family size question. Now, this is the one part where I mentioned it will pre-populate based upon what is in their 2022 taxes, but the application does give parents the ability to edit this information because they recognize that, okay, family size, previously known as household size, can change between, of course, the year 2022 and our current year of 2024. So it asks them if it is different from the number of individuals claimed on their 2022 taxes. If it's no, then they move on. If it's yes, it gives them the option to add or delete or whatever, what it is there in the bottom question here. I'm entering a number of children or other dependents who live with them. And again, receiving more than half of their financial support between July of 2024 and June of 2025. And then it breaks down the family size, right? How many parents, how many students, other children, and other dependents. Now here's the number in college in the family size between July 1, 24 and June 30th of 25. And it'll be how many people in that family size will be in college. You do not include parents. So this is really like for other siblings, for example, or maybe some other dependents that they have. Now this, if we recall, with the previous expected family contribution calculation, that number was divided. The EFC was divided by the number enrolled in college, right? Now, that was something that was pretty significant for some of our families in the past. That's no longer the case. With the new student aid index, it is no longer divided by this number enrolled in college. However, it's still being asked on the form, right? Even though it's no longer relevant for the calculation. Why? We were not really sure, but it's on there, right? So it's relevant in some case. It could be fair game for professional judgment, specifically for our returning college students who, of course, are going to go through this change, and this could cause a lot of returning college students for their SAIs to spike. So perhaps it's fair game for professional judgment. Again, that's at the sole discretion of your specific institutions for students and families in which they work with there. So they'll have to be in contact with them if that's the case. Now, again, it collects the exact same data elements reported in that financial section for the students and everything that we walked through, right? That's not pulled from the DDX. So here are the types of things that we may see. We can kind of go through what some of these questions look like here. We see some rollovers, other scholarships and grants reported as income, foreign earned income exclusion, child support received, and below it are asset questions, right? Some families may see this, some may not. If they do, again, all the net worth of all those businesses, all those farms, and any of those assets are going to be reported. And here's the other parent information here, right? They can go ahead and input this information. Again, if you have married filing jointly, folks, they can just do this for the parent. That would be the one instance where it could be a little bit more streamlined. But again, if we have married filing separately individuals or unmarried parents but living together, this is where that other parent would receive the invitation and log in themselves and do the exact same thing we just saw for the parent demographic section here. So here's how they would enter that information: just the name, date of birth, a social security number if that is applicable to that parent, and then the email address. Again, just like Manny kind of touched on a little earlier, if they don't have a social security number, there will be a box that'll indicate to them don't have that, and they can go ahead and prompt then a mailing address. And then that's it, right? Parents get their section done. They go ahead and they review each one of their sections here. Once again, have them double check this information, ensure that nothing's been altered and that every question that's been required to be answered has an answer. Once they do that, they can hit continue, and it'll be prompting them to sign and submit now the completed application. And you'll notice here it says sign and submit, right? Because now both sections have been completed. Now the application is actually complete and would be submitted. So they'll go ahead and click on that little checkbox that has them signed, and then they'll go ahead and hit sign and submit. So we'll talk now about confirmation and processing a little bit now. Again, this is the confirmation screen. Once they hit that sign and submit, this is what they're going to see, saying that the application is actually complete. Students will receive a confirmation email. Very important that they receive that. That ensures that they know that this application has been complete. Now, in normal times, it takes 3 to 5 days for a FAFSA to process. I may have touched on this earlier in the presentation, but I'm sure a lot of us here on this call are aware that there have been quite a bit of processing delays with the FAFSA. They have not processed FAFSAs since it launched, and they are not planning to do so until hopefully another week or two here. They did say mid-March the earliest, so we are expecting to see FAFSAs begin to be processed soon, which would then in turn allow students to receive a FAFSA submission summary, as well as for institutions to receive their ICER forms to then begin packaging aid. So a lot of this has been on hold. Students have not received a successfully processed email, for example. That's why they can't make corrections either, right? The FAFSA has to successfully process in order for a student to go back in and make corrections. There have been a lot of, I think the majority of FAFSAs who have been submitted still need corrections, right? So this is going to be something we're all sort of waiting to see what happens. And once hopefully they begin processing, we'll start to see these things sort of kick in motion. But it'll be a pretty short race to the finish line here, us kind of entering the spring season. Now, when they do receive that submission, the confirmation email, they're going to see a couple of important things, similar to how they would see it on a FAFSA submission summary, right? That data release number is an important piece to highlight in terms of some financial aid administrators and institutions will need that to identify who they are and whose FAFSA belongs to who, as well as their estimated student aid index, right? Again, this could be as low as a negative number in some cases. So that's why you're seeing that example on your screen. And then in turn would give them a Pell Grant estimate. So just those are three of the most important pieces you'd want to see in a confirmation email, thus a FAFSA submission summary. And here's a screenshot of what that's going to look like as well. It shows as well as just some general information, sort of a summary of all of the information that they inputted onto their application. It does have information not only about their SAI, but other federal student aid eligibility as well. You may think of federal work study in this situation or the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. Now, again, the FAFSA submission summary, typically in normal times where they would receive it, it could be a day or two, it could be a week or two, really depends. Again, with all these pressing delays, it's really going to be hard to determine exactly when students are going to be receiving these. I want to highlight just a resource to bring to your attention here in terms of our FAFSA communication toolkit that we have developed on our website in the counselor tab. This was a tool designed to serve as a resource guide really to our partners, right? Our counselors, our practitioners in the college going process to help communicate best with their students and their families about all of the changes to financial aid and how best to maybe advertise and talk about workshops, presentations, etc. So we have email template examples on there to folks who speak English and Spanish. Maybe you're emailing for volunteers to help you with workshops. Maybe you're sending out blast calls to parents, notifying them of the things you're doing in your school to support financial aid completion. There's robocall scripts on there, flyers, social media post examples, etc. Full package of examples and scripts to try and help better communicate with our students and parents about all the changes and the things that you are offering to them to support them. Excuse me, and I'll talk a little bit now about our financial aid completion initiative here, where our high schools can track their completion data, which is the FAFSA, the alternative application, as well as the opt-out waiver via using Gap Access. So for those of you who don't know, the opt-out waiver has moved to it online. It is found on our student portal site in the program applications and status check. And you scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then you can find the FAFSA non-participation waiver. Right? This is a last resort if students are not willing to fill out a financial aid application. They can go ahead and use the opt-out waiver. Now, doing so and having it online will automatically populate this into Gap Access. I know in previous years, right, schools had to keep a lot of paper copies there and had to manually go into Gap Access and one by one check students who filled out an opt-out waiver. No longer necessary. Right, this is all done online. It will be automatically populated into Gap Access if students are filling out opt-out waivers. Now, we get those rosters sent from the State Board of Education, and we upload those to meet compliance. Right now, U.S. schools, whenever Gap Access does become live, still have the ability to manually sort of individually make edits to specific students, add and delete functions as you see fit. But those rosters for our public institutions do get uploaded by us as we receive them from the State Board of Education. Now, Gap Access has not been up for some time, right? Because we are waiting from the Department of Education to start processing. We do rely on data from them to make sure that those rosters match with the financial aid completion data. So we're all sort of on hold. Once those things get processed, then we can announce that Gap Access is up and good to go. I'll highlight our First Generation Scholars Network as well. Sort of a brand new statewide network here. We're trying to encourage our first-gen students to keep going, as well as provide them with the resources and support that they need. And that could be connecting them to, say, a first-gen mentor. Maybe it's someone in the ISAC core. Maybe it's someone in professional staff. Also, maybe connecting them to a first-gen program on a campus. For example, I went to North Central College in Naperville, and I was a part of one of the best first-gen programs in the country called Cardinal First, where I received a scholarship every year for being first-gen, as well as academic and emotional support as needed. I really don't know where I would be without that program. Other institutions are creating first-gen programs as well. It's something that's expanded, so we are trying to expand a statewide network to try and connect these students to those types of things. These are free services here. It's a free network. Turn your first-gen students here and click on the Join Now button and get them involved. All right, the moment you've all been waiting for, my colleague Manny is going to open the chat and allow you to complete the SurveyMonkey evaluation to request your CE and PD hours. We also love your feedback for today's session as well, even if you are not needed those CE and PD hours. This evaluation must be submitted by close of business Monday, March 11th. We have it at 11:59 p.m. Just to get those evaluations completed by those dates so that we can give you those completed forms. If you're trying to complete it past the deadline, we will not be able to award you those CE and PD hours. If you are specifically requesting PD hours, please make sure you submit as well your Illinois Educator Identification Number. If we do not see you submit that education identification number in the evaluation, we are not allowed to award you PD hours, so that's got to be in there. So the chat is in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I just saw my colleague posted in there. It'll look like a little iMessage bubble. You click on that, you hit the link for the chat for the survey, and it will be in there. You have until Monday, end of day, to submit them. And then give us a couple of weeks to give you those completed forms. Our system here is not automated. We have to sort of manually do and complete each one of those forms for those who request them. So sometimes it takes us a little bit of time depending on how busy we are. Give us a week or two. We will definitely give you those completed CE and PD hours if you did request them. And thank you all so much for attending our FAFSA Simplification webinar series, the FAFSA line by line. Hopefully this was helpful for you all to see every single question that students and families will see and how the online form is working now. I know there's been a lot of issues with the application. We're all trying to push through, but hopefully when it works, it can become a more simpler process for the folks we work with. If you do have questions throughout your financial aid season, you know where to contact us. Give us an email at the outreach training inbox. We're happy to assist you with anything you need going forward. Thank you all so much for attending. Again, chat bottom right-hand corner for that evaluation, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you very much.